Here's a question I think about a lot when I'm talking to someone who's starting to get serious about retirement in their 50s. They've finally got some money going in. Maybe they've bumped up their 401k contribution. Maybe they opened an IRA. And they ask me, if I get a good decade of growth between now and retirement, does it matter that I started late? And honestly, the answer isn't what most people expect. Because there's a math problem that specifically punishes late starters, not because they saved less, although that's real too, but because of when the market decides to cooperate. According to Vanguard's 2025 How America Saves report, the median 401k balance for workers between 55 and 64 is about $95,600. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that's roughly $4,300 a year in retirement income, less than 4 months of the average Social Security check. And here's what makes that number dangerous. It's not just about the balance. It's about what happens to that balance the moment you stop adding to it and start taking from it. That transition point is where sequence of returns risk lives, and if you don't understand it, you can do everything else right and still run out of money. Let me walk you through what sequence of returns actually means, because most people explain it in a way that makes your eyes glaze over. The simple version, a portfolio that earns 7% per year, averaged over 20 years, can produce wildly different outcomes depending on whether the bad years come first or last. And if you're withdrawing money at the same time the market is dropping, which is exactly what early retirement looks like, the math turns brutal fast. Here's a concrete example. Say you retire with $300,000 and you're taking out $15,000 a year. In year one, the market drops 25%. You lose $75,000 in value and you've pulled out another $15,000. Now you're working from $210,000. Even if the market recovers perfectly after that, even if you get 9 straight years of 10% gains, you never catch up to where you'd be if those same returns had arrived in reverse order. The losses at the beginning, while your withdrawals are still large relative to the balance, are permanent. The gains at the end are working on a smaller pile. Now flip it. Give yourself those 10% years first. Your $300,000 grows to $465,000 before the 25% crash arrives. That same crash takes $116,000 off the table instead of $75,000 in nominal terms, but you had a much bigger cushion. You're at $349,000 instead of $174,000 after the same sequence of events, just reversed. Same average return, completely different outcomes. That's sequence of returns risk, and it's not theoretical. It's why someone who retired in 1999 with a balanced portfolio and started withdrawing through the 2000-2002 tech crash had a fundamentally different retirement than someone who retired in 2003 and caught a long bull run right out of the gate. So why does this hit late starters harder? Because a late starter has less time to build a buffer before that withdrawal phase starts. Someone who's been saving since 32 and retires with $800,000 has a lot more room for the market to take a bite. They can still absorb a 30% correction and have enough left to recover before the withdrawals overwhelm the portfolio. But if you're 62 with $140,000, which is above the median by the way, a 30% correction in year 2 of retirement takes you below $100,000 and you may never recover. The math just doesn't have anywhere to go. Now here's where I want to talk about the tools the tax code actually gives you. Because most people who are in their 50s and worried about this don't know what's available. And I'll tell you up front, the gap between what the law allows and what people actually do is enormous. The IRS, under Notice 2025-67, set the 2026 401k elective deferral limit at $24,500. That's up from $23,500 in 2025. If you're 50 or older, you can add an $8,000 catch-up contribution on top of that, so $32,500 total into your 401k in 2026. Now, if you happen to be between 60 and 63 years old specifically, not 64, not 59, it's that 4-year window, Secure 2.0 introduced what the IRS calls a super catch-up. Instead of the $8,000 catch-up, you get $11,250. That means your total 401k contribution in 2026 can reach $35,750 if you're in that it is 60 to 63 age band. That rule kicked in for the first time in 2025, and it's continuing in 2026. On top of the 401k, the IRA limit for 2026 is $7,500, up from $7,000, and the catch-up for anyone 50 plus is now $1,100. That's new. The IRA catch-up sat at $1,000 for almost 2 decades, completely flat since 2006. Secure 2.0 finally indexed it to inflation starting this year. It's a small number, $100 more, but the principle matters because it'll keep moving. And then there's the HSA, which I think is the most underused tool in the whole stack. In 2026, the family HSA contribution limit is $8,750. If you're 55 or older, you can add another $1,000 catch-up on top of that. So a couple both over 55, each with their own HSA, which requires individual accounts, you can't double up on one, could put away $19,500 in HSA money in a single year. That's pre-tax going in, tax-free on qualified medical expenses coming out. For people in their late 50s who are worried about healthcare costs in early retirement, the years between leaving work and Medicare eligibility at 65, that's not a side account. That's a critical buffer. If you add up the theoretical maximum, the Super Catch-Up 401k, a traditional IRA with catch-up, and family HSA with catch-up, you're looking at a tax-advantaged stack of over $52,000 for a single individual in a good year. That's real money. That would genuinely move the needle in 5 or 6 years. The problem? Vanguard's data shows only 16% of catch-up eligible workers actually made catch-up contributions in 2024. And the people who use it are overwhelmingly high earners. 52% of workers earning over $150,000 used catch-up versus fewer than 1% of workers earning under $30,000. The people for whom this math is most urgent are the ones using it least. There's a wrinkle I need to walk you through because it takes effect January 1st, 2026, and it'll catch some people by surprise. Under Secure 2.0 Section 603, if your prior year FICA wages from your employer, that's the number in Box 3 of your W-2, exceeded $150,000, then, starting in 2026, your catch-up contributions to a 401k must go in on a Roth basis. After tax, you don't get the upfront deduction. Now, the IRS published final regulations on this September 16, 2025. And technically, the formal enforcement is phased. Employers are expected to comply in good faith starting in 2026, and the full regulatory weight kicks in for 2027. But the intent is clear, and it's coming. Here's what's counterintuitive about this. For the middle-income late starter earning under $150,000, nothing changes. You keep the pre-tax deduction. It's actually the higher earner who loses the immediate tax break on catch-up contributions. And for a lot of people in that $150,000 to $200,000 range, the psychological shock of, I have to pay tax on this now, makes them hesitate. My take is, don't let that stop you. Roth contributions grow tax-free. A 62-year-old making Roth catch-up contributions still has potentially 2 or 3 decades of tax-free growth if they're healthy. The math still works. It's just front-loaded instead of back-loaded. If your plan doesn't offer a Roth option at all, and you're over that $150,000 threshold, you temporarily lose the ability to make catch-up contributions until your employer adds Roth. That's a real problem some people will run into, and it's worth confirming your plan's status before the end of 2025. I cover catch-up retirement strategy for late starters, and I want to say something that I think most advisors get backwards. For the typical person sitting where you're sitting, delaying Social Security is often more valuable than 5 extra years of maxing your 401k. I know that sounds like heresy to people who've been told to just keep contributing, but the math is stark. Full retirement age is now 67 for anyone born in 1960 or later. That phase-in that started decades ago is complete. Claiming at 62 permanently cuts your benefit by 30%. Every year you delay past 67, up to age 70, you earn an 8% delayed retirement credit. That's 8% per year, guaranteed, inflation adjusted for life. The SSA's 2026 fact sheet shows the maximum monthly benefit at 62 is $2,969. At full retirement age, it's $4,207, and at 70, it's $5,181. For a worker with a $2,000 per month FRA benefit, which is closer to average, claiming at 62 drops that to $1,400. Waiting to 70 brings it to $2,480. That's a $1,080 per month difference, permanently, every month, inflation adjusted. Now, I know what you're thinking. What if I die early? It's a fair question. But here's what I'd point out. If your health is reasonably good and you have any family history of longevity, the break-even between claiming at 62 versus 70 is typically around age 80. If you live past 80, you come out ahead by waiting. And the Social Security Administration's own data shows the average 62-year-old American woman lives to about 86, the average man to around 84. The fear that drives early claiming is usually louder than the math warrants. There's also a side benefit that's almost never mentioned. For a late starter whose savings are modest, a higher Social Security benefit means a smaller withdrawal rate from your portfolio in the early years of retirement. And a smaller withdrawal rate is exactly what reduces your exposure to sequence of returns risk. Delaying Social Security and sequence of returns aren't separate topics. They're the same problem approached from opposite sides. Let me be direct about the runway assumption because I think it's the most dangerous belief I run into. If you're 54 and you're thinking, I've got 11 or 12 years to fix this before I retire at 65, that's a reasonable hope. But EBRI's 2025 Retirement Confidence Survey found that 46% of retirees left the workforce earlier than planned, and 76% of those early exits were involuntary. Health problems, layoffs, a parent who needs full-time care. A 2018 Urban Institute study found that 56% of full-time workers in their early 50s get pushed out of their jobs before they choose to go. The practical implication: if you're 54 today, your real planning window might be 8 years, might be 5, which changes the math on everything, on how aggressively to use catch-up contributions, on when to start optimizing Social Security, on how much sequence of returns risk you can actually afford to take. The right move isn't to panic. It's to plan for a shorter runway than you think you have. Use every tax-advantaged dollar the IRS allows you to use right now, and treat Social Security delay as a savings vehicle in its own right, because that's exactly what it is. I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This is general education, not personalized advice. Consult a fiduciary before acting. If this was useful, subscribe. There's a lot more of this kind of math ahead. Next week, I'm digging into a specific scenario a lot of you have written in about. You're 51, you've got an old 403B sitting dormant at a previous employer, and you want to know the most aggressive catch-up strategy you can use right now. We'll get into the real numbers on that one. And what do you want me to cover next? If there's a specific piece of the catch-up puzzle, a Social Security question, or a Roth conversion scenario you'd like me to pull apart, drop it in the comments. I read them and I work the good ones into upcoming videos.